Electric cars, electric vehicles may be rising in popularity, but how do they hold up during a North Country winter? Science says things could be dicey, but there's a solution that we learn about tonight as we do our report with 7 News reporter Chad Charette.
They're quieter, said to be better for the environment, and on paper, a lot more energy efficient than gas cars. But when temperatures drop, electric vehicles powered by lithium-ion batteries may face some challenges.
So lithium ions have to move from one electrode to the other. And that motion at lower temperatures is much, much slower. The system is much less efficient.
Up to 40% less efficient when things get well below freezing, says Tesla driver Edwin Brown. That's fewer miles on one charge, making longer trips challenging.
There are several factors that affect the car tremendously, and gotta say that cold is one of them.
Efficiency isn't only an issue when driving. The cold also significantly increases charge times, another matter of chemistry.
When you discharge the batteries, right, electrons go from the anode to the cathode. When you charge it, it goes in the opposite direction, but you're still moving those charges. It's slower at lower temperatures.
One thing Edwin would like to see improve is infrastructure. There's not many charging stations around here, with only about 2 sets in Watertown. He lives in Carthage, so every time his car gets low, he has to drive here to juice it up.
The next closest one would be Parrish and then Syracuse. So we're talking about, they're quite far.
Brown believes that if communities can fix the infrastructure issues by installing more common, more powerful chargers, a lot of the problems posed by cold weather could be mitigated. As it stands, however, it's a challenging season for EV owners. Chad Charette, 7 News.